Good morning, folks. Welcome into the WFLA Now Stream Center, getting ready to launch our streaming coverage across all platforms. I'm JB Buno here at WFLA Now in Tampa Bay, Florida, covering this morning the second court appearance for Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger. He will be in court for a status hearing. We will talk more about the legalities, what exactly is expected to happen, and of course, we will have the court feed for you, not live, but the moment that it's fed out our way via satellite, we'll of course be sharing it with you here live on stream once it's legally permissible to do so. The moment that the hearing is done, we can share with you a playback of what takes place inside the courtroom. We're going to launch our streaming coverage momentarily, but before we do, I want to go to a report from News Nation's Brian Entin with one of the latest big questions on this case surrounding the surviving roommate. Here's the latest report from News Nation's Brian Entin. We'll be back in just a little bit.
Victim Kaylee Gonzalez's sister speaking exclusively to News Nation, asking people to hold off judgment against the surviving roommate who saw the killer in the house behind me.
The families of the Idaho murder victims are preparing for Bryan Kohberger's next court hearing this week, as we hear from Kaylee Gonzalez's sister Olivia for the first time since Kohberger was arrested.
There's this feeling that many have shared that perhaps Kohberger was watching the interviews, was in the Facebook groups, was on Twitter. Do you get a sense that that might be the case, that he was almost watching all of this as it played out?
I do. A lot of that comes from the fact that he had visited the home so many times before, late at night, early hours. He's presented this pattern of behavior. He went back to the home the morning of, before police had been called, I think to see if his circus, so to say, had started to unfold. And I think that he would not have been able to refrain from engaging with the online communities, the theories, the conspiracies, and everything in between.
Kaylee's sister speaking exclusively with News Nation, saying it is terrifying that true evil was watching over the college students. She's also defending surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen, who police say was awake and saw the killer, but did not call 911 for almost 8 hours.
I do know Dylan is really young, and she was probably really, really scared. And until we have any more information, I think everyone should stop passing judgments, because you don't know what you would do in that situation.
The Gonzalezes are in the process of setting up a foundation to help keep Kaylee's memory alive. Xana Kernodle's family has set up a scholarship in her name at the University of Idaho.
Did you feel any relief, Sydney, when there was the announcement of an arrest?
Yeah, definitely a little bit. I still think there's a lot of answers that I would like. So until I get those, I think I still I'm going to be a little hung up on this. So just about the answers, I guess.
Sydney Gribnitz was Xana's childhood best friend. Now Sydney and her dad have started a fundraiser through their gymnastics academy in Florida to raise money for Xana's scholarship endowment.
Xana was one of our students for about 6 years, and besides that, she was also one of my daughter's best friends, so she was always at our house. Her dad was single. She would come to our house until he'd pick her up after work, so it was almost like losing another daughter. So it's been a really difficult time period for sure.
The fraternity Sigma Chi also setting up a scholarship in Ethan Chapin's name. So many of these families and friends trying to turn this tragedy into some form of good. In Moscow, Idaho, I'm Brian Entin.
WFLA Now will begin momentarily. WFLA Now will begin momentarily. Live on WFLA Now, this is Hey JB. Here's JB Buno.
This morning in Idaho, murder suspect Bryan Kohberger back in court a week after his extradition back to the state where he's accused of brutally murdering 4 college students at the University of Idaho. We're going to take you inside the courtroom for the live feed with streaming coverage here live on WFLA Now. Welcome into the Stream Center, folks. JB here with you live across almost all platforms. We're going to be launching live on Facebook Live momentarily once we do have the feed from Idaho. Now, let's explain how this is going to work. Some know this already, some don't. We do not, based on Idaho court rules, we do not have a live feed from inside the courtroom, even though cameras are permitted inside the courtroom. We talk about this all the time on live stream, how different states and different counties and judicial jurisdictions have different court policies. Sometimes that can be specific to particular judges. In this case, with Idaho rules, we cannot live feed out of the courtroom itself for this hearing and hearings in the future. However, what we do have is cameras inside the courtroom where it's legally allowed that the moment that the hearing is concluded, they can feed that out via satellite, via TV feed, and we can get it, of course, here in the Stream Center, and we're going to play it back as what's called an as live. So we'll take you inside the courtroom itself, but we're going to have to wait a little bit of time for when the hearing is done. The hearing itself is expected to be quite short, very short, minutes. This is a status hearing to potentially set up a preliminary hearing. And we're following, of course, all the reporting that's being done in Moscow about exactly how this is going to take shape. So Bryan Kohberger and his defense team, they have a decision to make. This decision has likely already been made, of course, with the actual court appearance scheduled for 8 a.m. Pacific time there in Idaho, 11 a.m. Eastern time, of course, where we are in Tampa. And the defense could waive their preliminary status hearing, which would forego the preliminary hearing itself. Now, if the hearing is not waived, what is going to happen is in the weeks ahead, the two sides, we're going to hear about it today, the scheduling of the preliminary hearing, where in Idaho, per Idaho court rules, we would get potential evidence being put on display inside the courtroom, witnesses coming forward, digital forensics. It could be perhaps very revealing of a date, but this is the court appearance today to potentially set that up. I want to say hi to some of the commenters joining us. Michael Lyon in our comment section saying hello. You can use hashtag HeyJB as our moderator. Michelle Widener is noting here, make sure to use hashtag HeyJB to have your comments featured. We will be going to your comments, but really important is my eyes going in this direction, because right here on this touch screen here in the Stream Center, I'm paying attention to when we're actually going to get the playback of the court feed. So I'll be looking here quite a bit. The screen to my left, comments. Screen to the right is the live feed, and we are tapped into the feed itself, but it doesn't show anything at the moment because we haven't even begun the actual court hearing itself. When it concludes, they will feed it back our way, and you will be able to watch it here live on stream. So let's go over where we are in this case. News Nation's Robert Sherman is going to be joining us in just a few minutes. Great to have Robert back on stream. We will be trying to bring in additional guests as well. And as it stands right now, we'll talk more about this towards the end of the stream. Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, will be in here later this afternoon. We plan on launching a second live stream today to do a legal Q&A. There's so many questions pertaining to Bryan Kohberger, his defense, the prosecution, the evidence, the witnesses in this case, and exactly how this is going to take shape in the days, weeks, and months ahead. There's so many questions, and Peter is visiting us here in the Stream Center here at WFLA to help break that down. And I'll be tweeting out some more details about that in the hours ahead. So really hope that you'll be joining us for a two-stream kind of day here at WFLA. Also, before we go into some of the particulars, some of the specifics, want to point out, if you click on the link in the description on this video, it's actually in the pinned comment. Moderators, I'll ask you guys to help us out as far as sharing out the bit.ly link. We have our featured report today, an expert on what the Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger wanted to see. If you click on the link, that bit.ly link, it'll take you over to WFLA.com for more on some fascinating observations by a expert that was interviewed for, again, our featured report. So you can click on the link. And again, as a reminder, you can always come back to the live stream. We're still at least 10, 15 minutes away from the actual feed coming in upon the conclusion of the court hearing in Moscow, Idaho. We're going to be bringing in News Nation's Robert Sherman here in just a moment. He just hopped on the Zoom call here, and he's going to be actually, you know what? Why don't we bring in Robert now? Let's say hi, everybody. News Nation's Robert Sherman joining us there on Zoom. Robert, where are you joining us from? I mean, you're of course still following very closely the Idaho story, the murders of the 4 University of Idaho students. But where are you joining us from? And good morning to you.
Good morning to you as well. Yeah, joining you from McAllen, Texas today. Just kind of been jetting around the country over the last couple of days, but still keeping a very close eye on Idaho and probably going back there in the next couple of days, but juggling a few different assignments right now. I'm sure that you've been diving into a lot of this already on the show, so apologies as I'm just getting caught up here, but you know, it's kind of jury's still, you know, not no pun intended, jury's still out as to, you know, what exactly we're going to be getting out of this status hearing today in Idaho. I mean, it could be pretty quick and pretty, you know, just purely logistical, you know, in terms of what laying out what the rest of this case is going to be, the trial process, if he'll waive his right to a speedy trial, and this could be dragged out. Who knows? You know, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily expect anything crazy or groundbreaking to happen today, but then again, you never know what could possibly happen in that courtroom.
That's very true. And of course, we're going to be paying very close attention as whenever you have cameras inside of a courtroom. And again, this video here on the center of your screen, folks, this is from the first court appearance last week. But anytime you have cameras inside of a courtroom, any interactions that you see the suspect have, the accused have when it comes to speaking to their representation, their reactions, their facial reactions, oftentimes when it comes to something that the judge is talking about at that moment, even when they're asked to respond, their tone and inflection, these are it gets micro-analyzed with, of course, the fact that we have so often HD video from inside these courtrooms. So yes, it is a status hearing that we're about to, actually, the time has just now become 11 Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. So if things are running on time, and I'm sure the reporters on Twitter that are inside the courtroom are going to be helping us follow along here, we're going to get, of course, some kind of correspondence and reports from outside of the courtroom as this transpires. But if this is starting on time, it's happening right now, Robert, and this would set up a preliminary hearing, potentially, provided that the defense doesn't waive their preliminary hearing. If it sets up the preliminary hearing, there's a whole lot more that we could be learning about this case, and we also could be getting witness testimony as well, given what transpired last week with DM, again, the potential witness in this case, telling police that she saw the person clad in black wearing a mask walk right past her. The preliminary hearing could be massive.
It could be, you know, and that would be the emphasis would be on the prosecution in order to establish that there's probable cause if it goes to a preliminary hearing. And in order to do that, pretty much just about everything that you saw in that affidavit is going to have to come to the forefront. You're going to have to bring those witnesses in. You're going to have to lay out this evidence and show the judge, yes, there is probable cause in this case. So I mean, we'll see if they have to go through that and have to jump through those hoops, or if that process is going to be waived and we're just going to be waiting for what comes next here. But you know, again, you know, I mean, everybody wants some finality in this case, right? I mean, it seems as though that's the big thing, is that there's a lot of interest surrounding this case. People are hungry for justice. They're hungry for these few unanswered questions that they have to be answered as soon as possible. And you've got to let the legal process take its course. I mean, as we talked about a little bit on your show last time, JB, I mean, this isn't what anyone would really describe as a slam dunk case, right? You know, I mean, you've got a piece of DNA evidence from the crime scene. You've got the car appearing on cameras around town. You've got cell phone pings. That's what they're going off. And then, of course, you have an eyewitness from inside of the house itself. That's what they're going off of. And, I know that there is such an emphasis now on ensuring that the investigation remains buttoned up from here until finality. Because if there is a mistake in the investigation, if evidence was gathered in an illegal fashion, it could really disrupt the integrity of the case. So, I mean, these are all the things that people are going to be watching for. Everything has to be done very fastidiously from here on out. And we'll see what happens over the coming weeks and the coming months.
Yeah, Robert Sherman joining us again. Everybody, Robert Sherman, a correspondent for News Nation. I have to remind that we're always constantly engaging a new digital audience here on WFLA Now, and I have to always remind our audience every few minutes that we are waiting for the replay of the courtroom feed. So if you're just joining us and you're saying, hey, where is the actual court hearing itself? We are waiting for it to be legally allowed to be showed, and it will be from a replay, a refeed, if you will, outside of the courtroom. So that will come our way. And the moment that it is allowed, I can hit a button here. I'll be looking here quite a bit, and we'll be able to play it back live on stream as live, if you will. Brian Enton tweeting out a short time ago, our friend Brian Enton, about to go through security into the Kohberger hearing, live tweeting not allowed. But I will update when it's over and be live on News Nation. Now, they say that live tweeting isn't allowed, and that is so often the case with so many court jurisdictions across the country. But every now and again, it's still very commonplace for what's happening inside of a courtroom to find its way out, whether it's somebody leaving the courtroom and passing along information. This isn't that big of a hearing for that really to happen because of how short this is going to be. Brian might be, depending on if they're on schedule, Brian Enton might be on the way out of the courtroom, as would other reporters be within the next several minutes, Robert. It could be that brief. And then, of course, we will have the replay of the feed itself.
Right. And I know that there are some people out there who get frustrated by the fact that we can't get a live stream from inside the courtroom or can't get live tweeting there. And I think the thing to keep in mind here is that, I mean, especially with a lot of these cases, I mean, let's remember that a gag order was put in place here in this case. I mean, with any one of these cases, you really have to take a few different things into account. One is ensuring that the defendant gets a fair trial and the prosecution is able to go through their processes without public information interfering with the legal process. You also have to take into account that at some point the public does have a right to know what happened. And then you also have to take into account the First Amendment and journalism and the freedom of press. So you have to weigh all of those different factors at play here in order to determine, what is the best way to navigate here. And this is what the conclusion has come to is that, yeah, I mean, we're all going to be able to see what happened inside that courtroom, what is said by Bryan Kohberger, his counsel, what witnesses say, but it's not going to be done live. It's going to be coming in after the fact from a pool feed. So, and as you said, JB, I mean, we're living in the past here in terms of, what's happening inside of that courtroom. We're going to learn after the fact. But that could be coming down any minute, could be another 10 minutes. It's just hard to know. It's hard to be certain as to what's going to come out of this today.
The moment that it pops up, folks, we'll be playing it back. We will be, of course, muting our audio and just listening in to the raw courtroom feed. So if that's what you're here for, you haven't missed anything, stand by. As soon as it's legal for us to do so, we will be playing it back for you here live on stream. In the meantime, let's get to some of the hashtag HJB questions and comments coming in the Facebook Live, YouTube Live comment section. Nancy, hashtag HJB, can anything prevent this preliminary hearing from happening? And the answer is yes. The answer is that they can waive the rights of the preliminary hearing. And if they do that, I don't know what the odds are. And Robert, you can chime in here. The likelihood that they waive the preliminary hearing, I don't know if that's something that is all that likely. I guess it depends on the strategy here. But as I understand it, really anything is possible.
Right, exactly. And I think it's worth remembering that the status hearing that we have today was asked for by Bryan Kohberger's counsel. And I mean, then there's going to be a discussion today as to what the rest of this is going to look like. I mean, you said it right, JB, is that, I mean, a lot of this is legal strategy here. And, legal counsel is going to do what's best for their client. And that's what they're going to advocate for. So, I mean, this could be nope, we're good, open and shut. kind of situation here. We'll see you in court, or this could be a bit more drawn out and there could be more discussions taking place here. We kind of have to be ready for anything.
Amber, #HJB, maybe a question for the next stream, and we are planning on doing another stream that is really focused on the legalities of this case later on today with Peter Tragos, the lawyer but would there be any way to tell how long we'd be waiting to see a trial take place if they decide to go to trial? There's two things that come into play here. One, of course, your right to a speedy trial and whether or not you're going to waive your right to a speedy trial, but also just how backlogged things are in Idaho. I don't know what the court docket looks like as far as Idaho right now and how when exactly a trial would get scheduled. Robert, have you heard anything on that as far as how soon a trial could actually get underway in this case?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with your first point there, JB, is that you are entitled to a speedy trial. And that's part of what this today is the status hearing is that, I mean, Bryan Kohberger could waive his right to a speedy trial. And then all of a sudden, you're looking at post 6 months from now before anything takes place. It's just hard to say. A lot of these questions are going to be answered probably within the next hour, potentially within the next couple of minutes. But I mean, that's a large part of what's going on today is looking at those logistics of exactly, when is this all going to be taking place?
I'm really glad to see this comment from Scioli 700 #KJB. Bryan is innocent until proven guilty. We talk so often.
Important.
Yeah, so important. We talk all the time about how the court of public opinion issues their convictions the moment that they have a mugshot. I mean, a mugshot comes out, guilty, guilty, guilty is usually what you'll see online, but we have a legal process in this country. He is innocent until proven guilty. And, we talked to Peter Tragos last time about how strong, and you've noted it as well, how strong really is this evidence. We'll get into the evidence here in just a moment as we, again, wait for the courtroom feed to come, really at our fingertips. But how strong really is that evidence? I mean, there's different components. We've got forensics, digital forensics. We've got a possible suspect who possible witness who saw the suspect. There's the vehicle component, but really just how strong and how many holes can you poke in this arrest affidavit? There's been legal analysis left and right on various networks, Robert, but this is a big question ahead of trial.
Right. Of course, you have to remember the evidence standard that we're using here. I mean, this isn't tort law where you have a preponderance of evidence standard, which basically means you only need to be 51% sure that something was done here or not. You've got to prove this beyond reasonable doubt. And the burden of proof is on the prosecution. So, I mean, as we were saying, JB, and, of course, I'm not an attorney. I don't have a JD, this would be more best for one of your expert guests. But I mean, you look at the list of evidence that's here, if one of these pieces falls through or something like that, all of a sudden, getting a conviction and getting to that beyond reasonable doubt threshold gets significantly more difficult. So there's still a long way to go here. And law enforcement has made very clear that their goal is to get a conviction. But I mean, as we all know, you've got to convict the right person. And every defendant is entitled to their day in court, and they're entitled to fair defense and the opportunity to have their voice heard.
Let's go over the key discoveries, a brief recap while we are waiting for this courtroom feed to come up and pop up on my screen here. Let's go over just a really brief recap, Robert, as we did the last time you and I were on stream. We did it over the course of 2.5 hours. It was interesting. We got so many comments from people saying that they wanted the live stream last time to be longer, when I think it was roughly the length of the first Avatar movie, and they wanted even more coverage. It just goes to show that there's a massive appetite for information when it comes to this story. So many people are gravitating towards the details and want to ask about line 6 on page 4 or line 4 on page 6. But let's just kind of go over really quickly the recap of some of the key discoveries in the probable cause affidavit. We really knew that there were going to be several components. We knew that there was going to be, to an extent of some kind, that there was going to be some forensic component. We had, of course, inkling that there was going to be digital forensics that was going to be part of it as well. And we knew that the vehicle was also going to be part of this process because it was so integral for police to actually track down Bryan Kohberger. The big surprise to all of us was the fact that DM, one of the surviving roommates inside of the house, saw a figure clad in black walk right past her, wearing a mask covering the nose and the mouth, and leave through the back sliding glass door. That was the big reveal, if you will, of the probable cause affidavit that really nobody saw that coming.
No, nobody did. I mean, especially since the guidance that we were given since the beginning is that all of this took place in the victim's sleep, and that it was just really like two surviving roommates woke up to see the carnage that was left behind. And now you get this information that comes out about a roommate seeing somebody inside of the home, and, you know, the chilling details and the way that she was described as effectively being petrified and scared into not being able to move in that moment, really shed some light on, how scary of a situation this was. Naturally, JB, I'm sure that everyone who is watching right now and just about everybody on Twitter is still asking the same question. Why was there that long gap between the moment in which the roommate saw the person inside of the home and then calling 911 about 7-8 hours later? And I wish that I could look into a crystal ball and I could tell you what was going on inside that one survivor's head. We cannot. And, it's speculating at this point doesn't really do much good for anybody. In all likelihood, that roommate is going to have to enter some testimony into this case. That's what you would think, that at some point that roommate, assuming this goes all the way to trial, that roommate would be asked to take the stand at some point, because that is such a key piece of evidence that we have here in this case. So, I mean, it stands to reason that we're going to get all that information at some point. I mean, I think that the thing that I would say is that I think I said this on the show last time. Let's hold off on guessing at, that roommate's mindset and, criticizing that person, for their actions. Because one, I mean, very few of us have ever been in that situation before. We don't know what we would do there. And two, we don't really know the situation surrounding that. Let's let the legal process play out here. Let's see what happens over the coming weeks and coming months before casting judgment, and then see what the actual story and what the actual facts are in this case.
I can't begin. Robert, I don't know if you have as well, but I'll speak to my social media accounts. I have received so many messages. I lost count of how many messages, especially on Instagram, comments on TikTok, people trying to get a hold of me and communicate that being in that moment, how crippling the fear might have been for the surviving roommate, DM. Just Dylan.
Oh, JB, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah,
but I just got a message from Brian Enton, who just got out of the courtroom, and he said that Bryan Kohberger was in court today in an orange T-shirt and told the court he waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing, no bail.
Okay.
That's the latest guidance we've been given.
Okay, so that's a major development, waiving his right to a speedy preliminary hearing. So is he waiving the right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. He just tweeted out, Bryan Kohberger's preliminary hearing has been set for June 26th at 9 a.m., waiving his right to a speedy preliminary hearing. My goodness. I mean, that is waiving your right to a speedy preliminary hearing is something, but that is 6 months.
That's
right?
6 months. That's 6 months. And, with a preliminary hearing coming, that's when we're going to learn some more of these details and more than likely have some of these burning questions answered. But that's 6 months from now. That's a long time. That's a long time. And especially considering, of course, justice for the victims is always, the number one priority here. And, informing the public of what had happened, that's way down the totem pole in terms of priorities. But that is a long time for that community of Moscow, Idaho to know, exactly what happened in their community. A long time for these victims, for these victims' families in order to get more information in this case and to see the legal process carry out. You think about the fact that this all happened in mid-November and we're looking at the summer of the following year as when this is going to be a preliminary hearing. And that's just a preliminary hearing, a long drawn out process.
Long. I'm always first mind, always thinking about the victims. first thing that pops into my brain, and the victims' families in this regard, and to wait 6 months for a preliminary hearing. We were talking. People were asking. One of the comments earlier was when we were going to have, the beginning of a trial, and when the actual trial process was going to get underway, and just a 6 month delay that catches me by surprise. Robert, does it catch you by surprise as well?
I mean, it's a little bit hard to say, because I mean, it's all about strategy here. I mean, I think that I expected,
and not to interrupt you, this is mutually agreed upon, as I understand it. So both of these sides came to this date. You have to wonder if one of the sides wanted this to be even beyond 6 months, and this was the compromise. We'll find out more in a minute.
I'm sure that we will. I'm sure that we're going to be getting more information in just a couple of minutes here. But I mean, as we've said before, every defendant is entitled to a right to their best defense. And, if the public attorney and the public defense counsel who was appointed to Bryan Kohberger felt so that this was the best strategy for them, they're absolutely going to advocate for it. And that's part of the legal system here.
What does everybody think? We're going to spotlight some #KJB comments. What do you think of the preliminary hearing? Again, the preliminary hearing where you might, of course, get new evidence. You might, of course, get witness testimony. It is setting the stage for the trial in and of itself. What do you think of the preliminary hearing being scheduled for approximately 6 months from now, that being June 26th in Idaho? Hold on, I'm getting an alert. Okay, stand by. All right, sorry, folks. I was just being communicated to in my ear that there will be feeds coming down here momentarily. Robert, if you can kind of take things over here for a second as I talk with our feeds folks. Lawyers need to prepare for the trial, but 6 months is too long. I think a lot of folks are saying that online at the moment.
Right. And again, it's all going to come back to, how does this process carry forward? And I understand, a lot of people feeling that way here, but I mean, there are, criminal cases, which last years in the legal system. I mean, it's not totally uncommon for something like this to happen. And again, it's which factor is the most important here? Because there's several that you do have to weigh here. I mean, there are a lot of people who want justice swiftly. I mean, that's something that has to be considered. The public has a right to know and to be informed at some point. That's something to be considered. But it's also due process for a defendant. That's something that has to be considered. So how do you weigh all of these different factors here is in many cases how all of this ends up shaking out. And, exactly, we're going to learn momentarily exactly how this date was arrived upon and what the back and forth was like in the courtroom as the folks over there figure out, the feed situation. But I mean, surely we're going to be getting more information on this rather momentarily. I mean, there's just a lot to consider. There's a lot to consider in any one of these processes.
Yep.
And, as we get forward here over the next few months, I mean, surely that's going to be tough for these families in order to think about, how long it's going to take for them to serve justice. But I mean, you look on the other hand as well, Bryan Kohberger is not being offered bail. So I mean, he's going to be sitting in jail for those 6 months, waiting for this case to come up as well. So I mean, this is going to be a long time. This is going to be long and drawn out until we get to that preliminary hearing process.
We are moments away from the feed coming in. I actually tapped into a second feed that might come in first here in the Stream Center. So monitoring 2 separate feeds coming through on different technologies. The moment it's available, we're going to have it here live in the WFLA Now Stream Center. So we're going to be monitoring your comments here as we have Robert Sherman joining us from News Nation. Afterwards, we're going to be answering some questions, but some of the things that, of course, people are going to be looking for, demeanor, body language, just overall the conversation on how June 26th was selected as the date. And I believe now we do have the feed coming in. Let's listen in live from Idaho. Apologies, not live. Again, let me make this clear. This feed is coming in live, but this is the court hearing that took place a short time ago. and it would appear that they are preparing to play it back, and they did play it back, and something didn't operate correctly. So you're looking here at the screen that they're using to feed that back. So quite literally, we are waiting on somebody to hit the play button. And they also might have stopped because, and this is what will happen so oftentimes with live feeds, is somebody says they're not ready, that they're not recording. This is in all likelihood a pool feed. So all media outlets across the country have to be ready for them to receive this feed. And so they might have hit pause, a little bit of behind the scenes as to what's going on. And now it appears that they are trying to play it back. And here it is. This was moments ago in Idaho. And again, appears some difficulties with the feed. This is going out to all stations right now. So all outlets. So if you're watching on a different live stream, you'll be seeing the same exact screen. No audio on this feed just yet. They will likely turn on audio once the court hearing begins. This was moments ago in Idaho, the status hearing for Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger.
Right, good morning. We are on the record. This is cause number CR 29222805. This is State of Idaho versus Bryan Kohberger. Mr. Kohberger is in custody. He is appearing here in court with his attorneys, Ms. Taylor, Mr. Logsdon, Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jennings appearing on behalf of the state. This is the time set in the matter for the preliminary hearing status conference. So I am going to inquire of counsel. Ms. Taylor, what's the status at this time?
Thank you, Your Honor. We are going to ask the court to set preliminary hearing out into June. We would request the 3rd or 4th week of June and probably 4 or 5 days for preliminary hearing. Mr. Kohberger understands his right to a timely preliminary hearing, and he's willing to waive the timeliness to allow us time to obtain discovery in this case and be prepared.
And Mr. Thompson, are you in agreement with that?
The state has no objection to that, Your Honor. Ms. Taylor reached out to us by email yesterday with her proposal. On reflection, the state's calendar would be better in the month of July, but we will make the end of June work if that's the court's preference. And I haven't had a chance to talk with Ms. Taylor about that. I'm sorry, I know that's last minute.
That's okay. The court's calendar is going to be better towards the end of June, early July. So would that work, Ms. Taylor, for your scheduling on your other matters?
Your Honor, yes. If we take that 4th week in June, that's actually best.
Okay. So, Mr. Kohberger, I need to speak to you for a moment then. Sir, you do understand, and Ms. Taylor has represented here, that she's advised you of your right to have, or fully discussed with you, the right that you have, which is to have your preliminary hearing within 14 days of the date that you initially appeared before this court. As you recall, when I advised you of your rights, that hearing is a probable cause hearing where the state has to establish that more likely than not, these felony offenses were committed and you were the one that committed the felony offenses. If you waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing, it does not mean that you're giving up your right to have a preliminary hearing. It simply means that you would not be able to come back and challenge that the state did not present probable cause within 14 days. Do you understand?
Yes.
Have you had enough time to speak with Ms. Taylor about your decision to waive your right to a speedy preliminary hearing?
Yes.
Do you need any additional time to do so?
No.
Then I will ask at this time, as to the 5 counts, felony counts that were charged in the criminal complaint that was filed on December 29th of 2022, are you waiving your right to a speedy preliminary hearing and agreeing that that hearing can be held outside the 14-day period?
Yes.
And Ms. Taylor, do you concur with his waiver?
I do, Your Honor. Thank you.
I will find your waiver of speedy preliminary hearing is knowing, intelligently, voluntarily entered here in open court with the assistance of counsel. We will go ahead and set the matter for preliminary hearing. Monday, June 26th at 9:00 a.m. And I will go ahead and reserve the week, so June 26th to June 30th, in the event that we need all 5 days for presentation of evidence. And just so council knows, it will begin at 9 a.m. each of those days. Is there anything further to address at this time in the case, Mr. Thompson?
Not from the state's perspective, Your Honor, no.
All right. Or Ms. Taylor?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Kohberger, then you will be remanded into custody on your same no bail at this point in time, pending further proceedings. Again, we'll send notice out to council, and we will be in recess for this morning.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Breaking news on WFLA Now. Here's JB Buno.
The preliminary hearing for Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger set for June 26th. Kohberger making his second appearance in Idaho court, answering to the charges of murdering the 4 University of Idaho students. Hello there, folks. JB here with you live on WFLA Now. Let's bring back Robert Sherman. I'm just going to get right to our comment section. And our comment section is lighting up with one comment in particular, noting some of the cuts that are on Bryan Kohberger's face. I would say somewhere between 60-70% of our comments are all about some of the markings that he has right here next to his lip, and right there on the jawline as well. He looks to me, Robert, to be relatively clean shaven as far as his second appearance, ahead of his second appearance in Idaho court. So I'm looking at this as potentially maybe shaving cuts, but all our comment section is talking about right now are some of the markings on his face.
Yeah, and again, it's a who knows right now kind of situation. I mean, this case is being played so closely to the vest that we really have no idea what's going on here. And I mean, it could be nothing, as you said, JB. I mean, it could just be shaving cuts. I mean, it could be something more significant than that. I mean, who knows at this point? But I mean, it's just another piece of ammunition for the speculation mill, shall we say? I mean, looking at that status here that we just had here, I mean, it was kind of, as we talked about, it could be pretty point blank, open and shut. What this was. I mean, you even heard from the Latah County prosecutor, Bill Thompson, who said they had no objections to this date. They had some amicable correspondence with Kohberger's legal counsel beforehand. in order to set this date. So, I mean, everybody was fine with this. I mean, there was really no us versus them kind of dynamic here. And I know that, I mean, I'm already starting to get some people reaching out to me, who are frustrated, by like how long this is going to take until we have this preliminary hearing. But I mean, this is how this goes. This is how this situation tends to play out sometimes. And we're all just going to have to wait until June in order until we start to get some of the more details on this case.
For those of you just joining us that missed some of the conversation before this live stream or before the court feed became accessible to us, we're going to have an afternoon stream today on WFLA Now specifically about the legalities going forward. I have now a myriad of questions to ask to Peter Tragos, our special guest, the lawyer who will be here physically with me in the WFLA Now Stream Center, and really the entirety of that live stream coming up in a few hours on WFLA Now across all platforms will be just to answer your questions. I mean, that's really all we're going to be doing. We're going to be answering as many of your questions going through YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Twitter as well, rapid fire, so that we have a conversation about where things stand now with this preliminary hearing set for June 26th, again, in Idaho. Again, Robert Sherman, JB Buno here with you live. So, okay, the scratches on the face, that, of course, is the big thing that people are talking about in our comments section right now, whether or not they are shaving cuts. Look, if there was anything that had happened while Bryan Kohberger was in custody, something outside of the shaving cut scenario, we likely would have been told about it from Idaho police, Idaho authorities in general, and we have not heard of anything happening behind the scenes as far as his time in custody, again, after his extradition back to Idaho from Pennsylvania. So let's keep things focused here on the actual, the headline itself, that his preliminary hearing is set for June 26th in Idaho. Let's talk about the meaning behind that. Robert, there's now a ton of time, 6 months, for more evidence to be discovered, for there to be forensics that comes back, examinations on the Hyundai Elantra, examinations of some of the evidence that was quite literally taken out of the college residence, the Kings Road residence, just really in the last couple of weeks. All of this time now for both sides to prepare. It's not just Kohberger and his defense to prepare their defense now that they have the probable cause affidavit. It also gives time for more tips to come in. There's a lot of time now for both sides to really set the stage for what will be, I mean, to say the least, with all the time that's going to elapse, a highly anticipated preliminary hearing on June 26th.
Right. And it's, as you mentioned, it's more time for the prosecution in order to find, the facts that they're looking for and the evidence that they're looking for in order to get a conviction. But it also gives the defense opportunity to put together their defense in a way and to potentially find new facts to this case that aids the defense of Bryan Kohberger as well. I mean, everything is strategy here. Effectively what you've looked at is Bryan Kohberger has waived his right to a speedy trial. You even heard the judge say there is that the prosecution had 14 days to show that they had probable cause in this case. He's waived that right there. So an exception has been granted, that strays from the norm a bit, shall we say. There's a reason for that. There's surely a reason that the defense has asked for an exception. There's surely a reason that the defense has asked for all this to take place. Again, I don't mean to overstate my credentials here. I do not have a JD. I am not an attorney. I've sat in on a number of these cases before, and all I can tell you is that everything is done for a reason, and everything is done meticulously. And I'm surely we're going to be getting more information about that. But you're looking at a June timeline until you start to get some of these questions answered here in this case. You look at this gag order that has been in place, that's going to be a long time in order to hold over this gag order from both sides. Nobody's allowed to talk about the case. It's going to be a long time until a lot of people are going to get the answers that they're looking for here. Talking to some people in the Moscow community, we were just talking to them the other day. There's a lot of people who really want to know what happened in this case, largely because, this is really, the biggest homicide that's really happened in their lives. And for the first time, I mean, these people are telling us that they're locking their doors in Moscow. They're afraid to walk around town, for the first time in their lives. So, they do have stake in this game. I mean, this is for the people of Moscow, Idaho, that gets more than, the curiosity of the case. I mean, people want to know what happened in their community, and they have a right to know that. But of course, as we said before, there are multiple things that you have to weigh here. And one of the most paramount things you have to weigh is the due process for the defense. And that's what we're getting here.
Let's, some people are making note of his voice. He did respond to the judge, of course, when asked by the judge if he was in fact agreeing to his to waiving the right to a speedy trial. And then, of course, some of the folks noting that he was not in handcuffs as well. Look, that's that is done. Everything here is done per court procedure. So if he's not in handcuffs, that is because that is the policy and the procedure based, of course, on what's going on there with with Idaho court procedures. So others making note of that as well. Let's go to some of the comments on Facebook Live, on YouTube Live. If you use hashtag HeyJB, if you use hashtag HeyRobert for Robert Sherman, we can answer some of your questions while we're here live on WFLA Now. Or maybe you have, how often do we get just amazing observations from some of our commenters who point out something? Feel free to either point out something, I want to point out this comment from Black Rose, hashtag HeyJB. Do you think that they will find the knife? We haven't talked about that on this live stream. Let's still point out that the murder weapon itself has not been recovered. The sheath has been recovered, and the sheath might be the most important piece of evidence in the case so far for prosecutors, because on the button of that sheath was blood, a blood sample that they were able to use to establish forensics that pointed them and confirmed with, and I'll go, but where's the probable cause affidavit? On the very last page, I want to make sure I get the number of nines right here, Robert. At least 99.9998 of the male population would be expected to be excluded from this possibility of being the suspect's biological father. So again, genetic genealogy being used. But yeah, as of right now, there is no murder weapon. And that also, too, we're talking about June 26th. That gives investigators a period of half a year, roughly half a year, to find the murder weapon. But when we're talking about all the time that elapsed in the aftermath of November 13th and all of the geography that was all the many, many states between Idaho and Pennsylvania, there's just endless, quite literally endless possibilities for what happened to the potential murder weapon in this case, Robert.
Right. And you brought up that number, more than 99.9%. I mean, as somebody who's sat in these trials before, all that I heard there was not 100%. That's what the defense is going to say. That's going to be the point that the defense takes, in order to try and really belittle some of the evidence that the prosecution has gathered. Now, as we've said before, making the distinction here, to get a conviction in a case like this, the jury does not need to be 100% certain. It needs to be beyond reasonable doubt. Put that in the territory of like 90 to 95% sure that that's what happened here. So maybe the DNA paired with these other pieces of evidence that are here is enough. But I mean, you've got 6 months here, if you're the defense, in order to try and prove that DNA, that there's a rational reason why there would be this DNA in the home, if it is, the DNA, and there hasn't been a mismatch, or to give some rational reason as to why his cell phone pinged in the area 12 times beforehand. I mean, those are going to be the things, that right now, these are hard to answer, but keep in mind, you've only heard from the prosecution. You've not heard from the defense. The defense has not made, the defense has not been given the opportunity to respond to any of this and, explain why his cell phone pinged 12 times in the months leading up to the murder, or why there was a knife sheath with his DNA inside of that home. We haven't heard from the defense yet. All that we've heard really is Bryan Kohberger saying in a jail when asked why he did it, he said, "I didn't do anything."
Also,
That's what we've had.
I honed in and I got some messages on Instagram, people who were thanking me for bringing up the idea of the cell phone pinging being this, the smoking gun evidence, because we don't know the size of the ping range. We don't know if he was, how precise those pings are. They say that he went back. Okay, but how the cell phone triangulation, pinpointing his location, how pinpointed exactly is it? If anybody has found, I have looked, but if anybody has found any reports or any experts, that is something that I'm going to look into, finding an expert who can talk to just how specific those cell phone pings are. I mean, can you ping somebody down with the cell tower and the cell technology that was being used in this case specifically? I'm talking about the make of phone. I'm talking about the amount of towers, because cell tower triangulation and pinpointing someone's location, it comes down to the volume of towers. It comes down to a lot of different factors. So just how pinpointed was it is something that I really, really want to know, because I think it's a massive part of this case. I want to get to Mac Trucker Girl. This comment's been on screen for a minute or two. #HJB. We don't actually know if they don't have the actual knife at this point. They may have it by now. And this is entirely true. I mean, you would imagine that given the law enforcement sources that have been speaking on this story, you would imagine that if they had the knife, that might make it out to the media and maybe make it out to one of the reporters covering this story. However, with the gag order and with the way that things currently stand, as now both sides are getting prepared for trial, we just don't know if they have the actual knife. It's very possible. It's somewhat possible, I should say, that it was discovered somewhat recently, but we really have very little way of knowing.
And yeah, I mean, to that commenter's point, I mean, you look at what our disposition towards this case was the day before that affidavit came out and the day after the affidavit came out. So much of that information was kept from the public exceptionally well. I mean, oftentimes you get some degree of leaking, from law enforcement, and I mean, they kept that really buttoned up from the way that we had no idea that they had a knife sheath. We had heard rumblings that there was a DNA match, but I mean, nothing more than that. We had no idea that there was an eyewitness that was inside of that home. We had no idea that, we had, a consistent number of cell phone pings in the area. We had an idea that the car was important, but then we were told that the car wasn't important. And then, we just took it for what it was. So, I mean, law enforcement has done a pretty good job of keeping all this close to the vest. One thing that I would say, you made the comment about the ping range, on cell phones earlier.
Yep.
I mean, I think I want the viewers to keep in mind as well is that the distance between Pullman, Washington, and Moscow, Idaho, is not even the distance between Orlando and Tampa. It's not even the distance between Fort Worth and Dallas. I mean, it's 8 miles. And people go back and forth between those towns all the time. So I mean, you look at defenses that are going to come up. I mean, it's not as if there's no reason for Bryan Kohberger to be in Moscow, Idaho. I mean, they're so close to one another, and people do make those journeys. I mean, we met students at Washington State who go to fraternity parties in Idaho, and we met students at the University of Idaho who go to bars in Pullman, Washington, and hang out with Washington State people. These two communities are really symbiotic from that standpoint. So I mean, there's a lot to keep in mind there. It's not as out of place as one might think.
Yeah, and as far as the technology that was used to ping the phone, we know now. I mean, I don't know if you use it, Robert. I use it with some family and friends, like Find My Friends. And you can and when you load up Find My Friends, it will kind of show you a big circle, and then it'll shrink down to like a medium circle. And then once it really figures out where the person is, it'll kind of give you a really, really accurate pinpointed location as to where somebody is. But as I understand it, and I've done reports on this, as I understand it, that is GPS technology. And GPS technology and cellular tracking via cell tower, they're completely different. They're different technologies used to track somebody. And I just want to know more specifics as to, there's also the Wi-Fi component. I mean, hitting on the Wi-Fi. So, look, if you hit on the Wi-Fi, what is today's Wi-Fi range. When I launch my cell phone and I look at available Wi-Fi networks, sometimes I'll get the coffee shop located across the street, or even way larger, or way farther than that. So there's a lot of questions to be asked specifically about the digital forensics. And you know what? We have a lot of time to talk about it because we got 6 months now between now and June 26th. We're going to spend another approximately 10 minutes with Robert Sherman, if that's okay with you, Robert.
Perfect.
Again, why don't you really quickly, just tell people where you're joining us from and what you're working on for News Nation while I get to some of the other comments coming in.
Right now, I'm actually in McAllen, Texas, and we've been focusing on the U.S.-Mexico border and trying to go inside some of the human smuggling operations that have been happening down here. So we had a exclusive ride along with Texas State Troopers last night, which was the wildest car ride of my life, going on high-speed chases, pursuing some of these smugglers here in this region. And that's going to be on News Nation tonight at 5 and 6 o'clock Eastern time. So hope you'll join us for that. It's some pretty intense things that we saw down here.
Robert doing us a kindness, hopping on stream with me because he's covering a lot of different stories as we speak. And with Bryan Enton, of course, doing his work for News Nation and being physically in the courtroom, he was unavailable to join us on this live stream. I talked to Bryan last night. It was just a little bit too difficult for him to, when we do these live streams, and Bryan knows this, as I'm sure Robert does by now, it's usually long form. And so Bryan could have maybe hopped on for a minute or two, but it would have been really tight. And I just said, you know what, Bryan, just worry about News Nation. And that's why I called up Robert, who I knew was not in Idaho anymore, but he was kind enough to respond and hop on stream with us. So let's make the most out of these next 10 minutes and look at some of the comments that are coming in. We don't, I haven't followed. This is a great question. Caitlin Sweeney wants to know, #KJB, were any family members there? Were any family members in the courtroom? I would imagine this to be extraordinarily likely. I've not seen any reports yet. Robert, have you? We can look on Twitter for some of the reporters that were in the courtroom as to whether or not, the Gonzalez family was there, or any of the other families were represented.
I have not heard anything yet. I'm taking a look for that now to see if Bryan sent out any notes on that. I haven't seen anything about that yet. That's a great question. I mean, I know for some of these families, it's been very hard throughout this process, as you can imagine, to be involved in any way. Other families have wanted to be there every step of the way. Hard to know. Hard to know. I'm sure we'll find out soon.
Yeah, and also seeing here, Steve Gonzalez's comments that, excuse me, that there was a Wi-Fi hit. I do see that. I don't know the source of that information, but I'm getting a lot of people sending me that Steve said that there was a Wi-Fi hit on the Kings Road residence Wi-Fi. A lot of questions will be asked about that as well. The accuracy of that, the range of that, and how long that hit existed. But it really goes to show that digital forensics, right there, side by side with forensic sciences, with body forensics, with DNA forensics, is what I'm trying to say. It's just so vitally important, and it is an expanding field. To students out there that are looking for fields to go into, digital forensics is just growing so vastly quickly. Digital forensics
and a constant reminder
going forward.
I mean, a constant reminder how much information is on one of these at any given point. Yeah. How much information, just getting access to this can tell a lot about somebody. And I mean, this case has really proven that to be quite true.
Let's see here. Carrie in our comment section said that someone mentioned that they were going to be present on Zoom. Amanda saying the same thing, joining via Zoom. I did not see that report, so thank you to our commenters for sharing that along. And courtroom proceedings, they have changed very much, and that people can now attend virtually if they cannot appear physically. Petunia wants to know, #KJB, any motive yet? Motive is elusive, and whether or not there is a connection between the suspects, or excuse me, the victims and the suspect, excuse me, that kind of remains unclear as to what kind of connection might have existed. We know about the cell phone pings beforehand, as Robert has noted, but again, motive for murdering 4 college students, and then also as well for the 2 surviving roommates, for them to survive. I mean, there's so many questions pertaining to motive and the actions in that 4 a.m. window on November 13th, but motive remains elusive. But also, too, as far as these next 6 months, again, motive will be something that is continuously brought up by prosecutors as they plan for the preliminary hearing and the subsequent trial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, still a lot of questions that we need to answer here. And I can guarantee you that prosecutors are working on that right now as they're working to build their case out. I mean, it stands to reason that late June is going to be very informative for a lot of people who are following this case. Next couple of months, though, I wouldn't expect much to come out in any case. I mean, especially with this gag order in place, I think we're all just going to have to wait patiently.
I did not see Brian's report last night on News Nation, but Kristen saying that Gonzalez's family, or parents rather, that they were going to watch the hearing via Zoom today. So thank you for sharing that. Some other questions, some final questions before we begin to wrap up the stream. Caleb, will the actual trial be live streamed? No, it's going to be done in a capacity similar to this one. And so, you know, what's very, well, I can't say for certain that it's not going to be live streamed. Court policy could change between now and then, but what it's going to look like when if this does go to trial, as we expect it to, as far as media access and public access, that's going to be interesting, because if it's similar to now, where they can feed back the entirety of it, but they can't show it live, well, would that put us, Robert, you and I, at the end of the day at dinner time, beginning our live stream and playing back through the entirety of the day's court events? I mean, I just don't know what court policy is in Idaho when it comes to the trial itself.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not quite sure either. And as you said, a lot of that is subject to change, and a lot of that comes down to conversations between judges and prosecutors. I mean, I've sat in. I remember there was one federal trial that I covered in Alabama, where defense attorneys were adamant, we do not want any media to be able to report on this, no live tweeting, gag order in effect. And the judge said, no, in this case, I mean, I'm looking at the facts of this case and, you know, what's at stake here. And I believe the First Amendment is very important here. I'm going to allow live tweeting in this courtroom. I mean, sometimes it comes down to a conversation between the judge and the different counsels. So far we've seen that they believe that it's best to have this gag order in effect and to limit the exposure to an extent. That could change. Who knows?
Robert, Roll Tide or War Eagle?
I'm actually not a fan of either one of them.
Okay.
I actually grew up in the Midwest, so I grew up a Michigan fan. But I'm sure all the people in Alabama are going to yell at me for that now.
Robert and I have an Alabama connection. Robert was a reporter in Birmingham, Alabama, at WIAT CBS 42. I was a reporter for almost 5 years at WKRG, the CBS affiliate, down in Mobile, Alabama, the home of Mardi Gras. So there's a bit of a connection that Robert and I, we have crossed paths, but also not crossed paths in so many different regards as far as our respective careers. Let's go to some of the other comments that are coming in here on YouTube Live. You know, we haven't talked about this. MC wants to say #KJB, kind of worried the prosecution wanted it in July, would say it's due to lack of evidence. No, I don't necessarily, and this will be interesting to ask Peter later, but you know, the prosecutor in this case said, you know, that actually it would be better for us to do this in July, which I found to be very interesting. But also at the same time, this goes to show a district attorney's calendar is chock full of different cases, and scheduling is so important when it comes to procedure, when it comes to these cases, and you have to find windows for where it works for both the prosecution, the defense, and the court itself. We're talking about, you know, the actual court's availability, the judge's availability. So I don't think that too many people should read too much into the prosecution wanting it in July. That was more of a scheduling thing as they made it sound.
Yeah, it just goes to show, you know, backlogs that you see, you know, from from the major counties and states to the smaller ones as well. I mean, that there is a lot on the plate of all these local officials here, and it does take a long time in order to navigate all of this, which is why you have things such as plea bargaining in effect in order to try and lighten the load on the legal system. I mean, it does not seem as though we're going to be getting any kind of plea bargaining in this case. However, I mean, from everything that we could see, it looks as though that we're going to see this thing all the way to the long haul, and both sides are really going to press it here.
Someone, hashtag KJB, if he left DNA on the sheath, where's the rest of the DNA that should be all over the murder scene? Millions have bushy eyebrows. Excuse me. I want to point out that, again, forensic testing will likely continue to be done in we don't know at how large of a capacity, but there is going to likely be continuous forensic discovery that goes on over the course of this process. And while they do have a genetic genealogy match, the 99.9998% match on the father, there's potential new DNA evidence that could come to light. So people who are pointing, where's the other DNA evidence? People watch crime shows and they say, man, a strand of hair that is found at the crime scene can be a match, or a fingerprint, so on and so forth. That this is part of the process that will now take place. This is still, people think this is over for police. This is still a very active investigation that is currently underway, and that's why they're still receiving tips even to this day, Robert.
Right. And, I mean, you think about it here, I guess I would push back against the DNA all over the murder scene comment. I mean, just because we know, reality is shows such as CSI are so ubiquitous that, I mean, just about everybody knows that it's like, if you were going to do something like this, you would wear gloves. You would try, that DNA is a reality, and you would try and cover up as much as possible here. So don't know how much DNA is all over that crime scene. I mean, that's purely speculative. But I mean, it seems as though that law enforcement is working with what they have here. I mean, a knife sheath being left behind at a stabbing scene with a piece of DNA on it of someone who does not live in that home, at the very least, warrants questions and warrants investigation. It's not unfair to say, well, how did this get here? Is it safe to say alone that alone is enough to convict somebody? Again, I'm not an attorney, but I mean, that seems just like one piece of a larger puzzle that needs to fit into this mold here. So I mean, it stands to reason there's going to be more. That there's going to be more that's going to be coming out. I mean, all that the prosecution needs to do right now is show that there is probable cause. I mean, you think about that. I mean, the standard of probable cause is not the same as the standard to convict someone beyond reasonable doubt. So, I mean, you're kind of taking this one step at a time right here. Right now, it's all about the preliminary hearing and showing that there is enough evidence to even proceed forward.
Robert Sherman joining us from News Nation. Robert, I'm gonna let you go. The floor is yours as far as some of your final comments. To our audience, I have a couple of important final notes here on stream that I'll talk about here in just a moment, but I want to give Robert the floor here first.
I think that, like, the first thing to say is that I can only imagine how frustrated a lot of people who are out there. I can only imagine what the families of these victims are going through, and what everybody who's intimately involved in this case is going through. And I can imagine there's a lot of people who are coming out of today very frustrated that there are still all these questions, and this is still such a pressing issue here that a lot of people are grappling with. And now we're all going to have to wait until June until we see the next step forward in this case. I would just encourage everyone to wait until the evidence comes out. Wait until we start to learn more. Speculation really is just not going to do much for anybody at this point. I know that everybody wants to make their own theories and to guess and things of that nature. I mean, it's really not going to do anybody any good right now, because we're going to have to wait until the more evidence comes out, until there's this preliminary hearing. I would hold off on casting judgment against the one roommate, still until we get the opportunity to hear from her. I would hold off on, calling this an open and shut case, because we do not have a conviction in this case, and Bryan Kohberger is still innocent until proven guilty. there's still a long way to go here throughout this whole process. I would ask everyone to just hold their horses and wait and go through this all meticulously in order to assure accuracy in the legal system.
Robert Sherman, are you, real quickly before I let you go, are you heading back to Idaho?
More than likely.
Okay.
More than likely. We'll see when the next major development is going to take place. But now it seems as though that we're going to be in limbo for 6 months, give or take.
What's interesting is that it gives at least the opportunity for some of the cold to escape Idaho. And when things really do start to pick up again in June, as far as courtroom activity, if Robert is there, Bryan is there, they'll more than likely be able to leave their winter jackets at home. Robert Sherman, well, I'll be looking for all your reports, man. Nice job with all the border work that you're doing. Really just excellent reporting that you're doing down there. And we, of course, I really appreciate you hopping on.
Thank you, JB. Thanks for all you do.
All right, Robert Sherman, everybody, give him a follow, of course, on social media. He's terrific, and some of the stuff he's getting at the border is absolutely fantastic. Really, just insightful reporting. Before we wrap up this live stream, really, I want to spotlight some of these comments because there's some great questions that you have coming in here. I mean, really, some phenomenal ones, including Natasha Brown. What do you think Bryan's biggest defense statement will be? What will be the primary strategy behind his defense? How about Peter Tragos, who's going to come on later? He's going to be able to answer this question. And this might be a question that we will lead with, or one of the questions that we will lead with, because he is a defense attorney. So Peter, again, the lawyer you know on YouTube, he's right here with us in the Tampa Bay area. He'll be able to answer this question so much better than I will be able to. I have really... I can't answer this question. I'm not an attorney, but somebody who represents others in cases like this. Look, Peter will be able to shed light on these comments so much more. So we have to hop off live stream. We have other things coming up here at WFLA. We're going to hop off the live stream here in just a minute. Let me explain where this is going to go. I do not have an exact start time yet. Moderators on YouTube, I don't have an exact start time yet for our next live stream. But the next live stream with Peter, I just confirmed with him a moment ago, he will be here with us in the Stream Center. He'll be in our evening newscast with us tonight, and he'll be here with us live on stream. The entire purpose of his visit is to answer your questions. So there's tons of legal questions that exist after this. And Peter and I are going to break it down with you as you ask these questions, as you ask these questions. And so we hope that you'll join us a little bit later on this afternoon as we break down some of the massive questions and maybe the questions that ordinarily you wouldn't see asked on news coverage. We're going to go through the big, medium, and small questions that you might have pertaining to where things go with Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger, and really as just seeking justice in general for the four families and all the loved ones of the four victims. Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, Ethan, they deserve justice. And where are we on the pathway towards justice? There's so many questions that exist. So we're going to be here in the Stream Center for an afternoon stream. I'm going to be tweeting out and sharing out on Instagram, my Instagram page, and also on Twitter when we're going to do our live Q&A live stream. Some of our live streams, we go through reports, or we go to feeds, or we do, conversations between the guest and I. The sole purpose of the feed coming up, the WFLA Now live stream coming up, is to answer as many of your questions as possible. We know that there were so many questions that came in over the course of this live stream that we were unable to get to, and frankly, there are a lot that we just are not able to answer without an attorney present. So Peter's going to be here for the next live stream. We really hope that you'll join us. It is likely coming up in the 4 o'clock Eastern hour at some point, but I will tweet out a link and a start time on Twitter. I will also share it on my Instagram page as well. I'll also point out that I've finally gotten on TikTok. To our audience that really gravitates towards TikTok for news when it comes to these types of stories, I have finally put out content on TikTok, and I look forward to being somebody that puts out information that is useful to you on TikTok. I'm not the type, you guys. You don't want to see me dancing and doing all the pre-choreographed dances. that exist on TikTok. I'm not going to be telling you how I like my coffee or whether pineapple belongs on pizza. While I will try to have some fun every now and again, to some extent, my primary purpose for being on that platform is to try to share some of the work that we do on WFLA Now, some of the interactive journalism that we're doing here at WFLA. So Twitter, well, I always go live on Facebook, but Twitter is where I'll be tweeting out the start time for the next stream, the live Q&A with Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know. I'll be sharing that out on Instagram as well. And for our audience who appreciates the content that we do here, the interactive journalism here, that we do here at WFLA, feel free to give me a follow on TikTok as well. I'll be sharing out some very unique content that you won't find on live stream. I'll be sharing out some very unique content on my TikTok page. I really appreciate it. And also, too, we began the live stream with this, but I want to point this out. We have our featured report right now on WFLA.com. You can click on the link in the pinned comment. You might see it also as well on the description on this video. An expert describing what Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger might have wanted to see when he returned to the house. It's very interesting. The expert-based report that we have right now on WFLA.com, and the way to get to it is to click on the link in the description on this video. Folks, I'll be sharing out details about our next stream, the exact start time, and a live stream link to our live Q&A with Peter Tragos, the lawyer you know, about where things stand and where things head with Idaho murder suspect Bryan Kohberger. I'll be sharing that out on Twitter, on Instagram, more ahead in the hours ahead on WFLA Now, on WFLA.com, and the WFLA app.